Have you ever noticed that there seems to be an ever-present, pervasive obsession with difficulty in games? Whether it's a first-person shooter, an indie horror game, or an old-school platformer, players around the world seem to almost fetishize the concept of mastering a game, with Soulslikes becoming the sort of gold standard with the rise of From Software over the last decade or so. Players have put increasingly difficult games on higher and higher pedestals, and in the process, devaluing other gameplay styles and players with different wants or needs. It's undeniable that it can be incredibly satisfying to work at something, devote your time to it, and see yourself steadily improve. The immense satisfaction of completing an area or boss that once felt impossible to you is palpable, but it shouldn't be seen as the be-all, end-all of gaming. As much as I love a lot of things about Bloodborne, for example, I never finished it because of the incessantly repetitive qualities of the Souls-like genre. I love the world and all its idiosyncrasies, but it kind of makes me feel like a hamster on a wheel, albeit a very cool and gothic hamster wheel, so I'll give it its points for that. You spend so much time doing the same things over and over and over and over, and when you finally get rewarded with more of the story, you often get crumbs. And the lore, as fascinating as it is sometimes so few and far between that I often didn't feel the motivation to take the plunge back into the game every time I inevitably took a break from it. It's now going on 5 years since I took my last break and swore I would get back to it, so oops. But hey, don't get it twisted. I'm not someone who likes to be spoon-fed a narrative either. I relish games with complex storylines that I really have to take my time to think on. That's why Kotaro Uchikoshi's games are really special to me, specifically the Nonary games and the Somnium Files titles. The gameplay requires a lot of critical thinking, and their storylines are multifaceted, complex, and positively mind-bending at points. And I adore gathering all the little clues and pieces and trying to figure it all out. Another one that comes to mind is Karao by developer Stroboscope, which debuted as part of the Dread X5 collection. The Dread X collection, for those of you who don't know, is a series that curates indie horror titles under different themes. Karao is cryptic, bizarre, and filled to the brim with a sense of dry, dark humor that really appeals to me. That creepy-ass song that plays throughout the game lives rent-free in my mind. A commenter under a video of the song called it murder vocaloid indie folk, which is not only hilarious, but feels like it belongs on r/brand new sentence. I watched a Let's Play of the game last year, and it really stuck with me. I found myself thinking about it and analyzing it from every angle in my head while I ate dinner, did my skincare, and even lying in my bed at night. And then I played it for myself and fell in love with it all over again. It's compelling and haunting and gives you all the clues you need to piece the story together yourself, without ever explicitly telling the story to you. Yet despite all this, I and many others like me have been made to feel bad about not preferring increasingly difficult gameplay. The discussions around the Souls-like genre, for example, are largely centered around it being a genre for the intelligent, for those who don't like to be coddled, for the players who keep coming back with more determination each cycle, and of course, for the players who are real gamers. Can you hear me finger quoting? I'm finger quoting vigorously towards my microphone right now, can you hear it? Anyway, the fanbase is so obsessed with difficulty being an integral part of the experience that fans of From Software actually got pissed off with the creator of Dark Souls, Hidetaka Miyazaki, when he himself said he was considering adding an easier difficulty mode to include more players. Fans were so mad at him for this that Miyazaki's team eventually chalked it up to a mistranslation to avoid further backlash, despite the fact that it seemed pretty clear he felt really sad that some players were unable to experience his games. Of course, it's not just Souls-likes and their fan bases that are like this. Games like Furi by developers The Game Bakers and Scrutinized by Reflect Studios are fully built around the philosophy that harder is better, and that those who can't keep up aren't worthy. And the people in this circle tend to also be against giving the option of different difficulty modes. Or they'll give us different difficulty modes, but mock and insult the player for being childish or weak. Just look at Wolfenstein: The New Order, where the easiest difficulty mode is called Can I Play Daddy and shows Blazkowicz wearing a bonnet and sucking on a soother. This was actually a callback to the 1992 Wolfenstein 3D, where they did the same thing, so shaming players who want very difficulty modes goes back that far. In the case of Scrutinized, defeating casual mode will give you what they call the shit ending and display bright colors on screen with the sound of a child cheering and clapping, with text that reads, "You are now ready for normal mode."
Yay!
And defeating normal mode still doesn't give you the real ending. That's reserved only for the chosen few who can play the higher difficulty levels. And finally, in the case of Furi, they'll discourage you from choosing an easier difficulty. And if you choose it anyway, they too refuse to give you the full experience. Cecilia D'Anastasio of Kotaku states this about Promenade, Furi's version of an easy mode, quote, "You're shamed for picking it, which made me wonder why it was included at all. Really, you're not only shamed for picking it as much as you're shamed for being the kind of person who would pick it." End quote. She also states that when you try to go through with selecting Promenade, that, in her words, it warns you again that you're a wimp, and that the word promenade is a constant reminder on screen that you're not playing the game right. There's unfortunately countless more examples, but I won't belabor the point. These types of developers and fans of this trend believe every player should rise to the occasion and devote themselves to getting good enough to play it the way it was intended, which is how and why the phrase "get good" was collectively brought into our modern lexicon. And as if all of that isn't elitist enough, these conversations rarely, if ever, talk about how this entire system they're all circle jerking to completely excludes a subset of players who may require different difficulty settings for access reasons. Imagine how it would feel to experience this if you had a disability. Infantilization is something we disabled folk deal with constantly, and attempting to play a game in our off time and experiencing it again on screen in full color, well, I shouldn't have to say it fucking sucks. I became intimately aware of this dynamic pretty damn fast when I became chronically ill. Games like Devil May Cry, which never gave me trouble before, suddenly became a whole different beast for me. Where I previously played with nary an issue in sight, I am now facing brain fog, which can slow my reflexes down. Hands that seize up and cramp when playing too hard, and wrists to scream out in pain if I play too long. Hell, even sitting up for too long causes deep aching in my chest area, back, and hip joints. And suddenly, the disparaging comments and rudeness directed at those who struggle to keep up felt very personal. I too used to kind of fetishize skill. I never pushed it on others or shamed anyone, but my gaming skills were something I was really proud of. And where I'm at now, I have felt shame every now and again when choosing easier difficulties, even when I'm sitting in the room by myself. And if I'm being honest, I still usually choose normal and put myself in extra pain anyway, because I've somewhat internalized the concept of needing to play the game as the developers intended. It's even caused me to re-record some of my gameplay footage or cut out certain parts while in the editing process, out of shame that someone might see me struggling and think I'm not worth watching. This isn't an unfounded concern. Back in 2017, VentureBeat featured a video of game journalist Dean Takahashi having trouble completing the first level of the notoriously difficult Cuphead, the 1930s-style cartoon side-scroller by Studio MDHR Entertainment. And viewers mocked him and questioned whether or not he was worth his salt as a games journalist, whether he was worth listening to. The video is even titled Dean's Shameful 26 Minutes of Gameplay, as if preemptively bracing for fallout. In an article appropriately titled Video Game Culture Needs to Stop Fetishizing Skill on pastemagazine.com, author Dante Douglas states the following about the phenomenon, quote, "Video game culture, writ large, fetishizes skill. An individual's skill at a particular game determines the validity of the argument posed by that individual in most common spheres of discussion. But it's not really a good barometer for critical meaning by any measure. Games, especially in the modern era, with the aid of Let's Plays, streaming, and various other methods of content absorption without mechanical interaction, are no longer simply puzzle boxes to unlock knowledge of by solving. Games are stories, conversations between player and world, and conversations between designers and viewers. End quote. I couldn't have summed it up better myself. Games are a powerful medium in which we can deliver not just a meaningful storyline, we can create an experience. Unlike film, where you sit back and take it in, games are an immersive medium in which we are an active participant in the magic. And this is exactly why we need to make room for all types of players so they can experience the wonders and joys of playing games too. I'll be the first to tell you, games can be life-changing, and there's games where the story and overall experience have truly changed me for the better, and I'll always stand by that statement. People like me shouldn't be relegated to only playing low-key farming sims, and as fun as those can be, we should have the option of playing games in all genres. And I'm not saying that's an easy task to undertake either. Put a pin in this, because we're gonna come back to it. But first, is a high level of difficulty always a bad thing? Well, no. I'd like to take a second to analyze why it isn't always an inherently negative trait. While doing research for this video, I was reading an article from Wired titled "High Difficulty Games Don't Have to Be Toxic" by Will Bedingfield. And in it, he discusses how author Patrick Jagoda proposes that there's 3 different types of difficulty in games. In Jagoda's book titled "Experimental Games: Critique, Play, and Design in the Age of Gamification," he proposes that the 3 types of difficulty present in gaming are the following: mechanical, interpretive, and effective. Mechanical is what it sounds like. It's the type of difficulty you'd experience in a Soulslike, for example. Interpretive, meaning its difficulty is more rooted in the narrative being told and its ability to be close-read and analyzed by sharp-minded players. And finally, effective, being a game that is difficult to digest due to deeply emotional themes. Games that deal with topics that are heavy and often triggering, especially to those with trauma. Topics like suicide, self-harm, and terminal illness. Jagoda cites That Dragon Cancer as a game that isn't mechanically difficult, but deals with the heavy themes of what it's like to be diagnosed with a rare and dangerously progressive form of cancer. And that in itself makes it a difficult play. Interpretive and effective difficulty have been long debated before video games were part of the equation. Will Bedingfield mentions that literary titles like Ulysses have been debated in academic arena to be difficult for difficulty's sake, while others argue it can be deeply beneficial for an audience to think hard and be led deeper into a kind of profundity that shallower art can't reach. And I'd say I mostly agree with that. But the difference with mechanical difficulty, though, the Souls-like type difficulty, is that you can't dodge it the way you can dodge other forms of difficulty. Bedingfield says difficulty itself remains the most distinctive element of gaming as a medium. Remember how I mentioned that difficulty fetishism and its proponents were still at it back in 1997 with Wolfenstein? Well, it turns out it goes back even earlier. Debates about skill and whether or not offering difficulty modes was necessary is a discussion we've been having as early as 1977. 1977 being when the first instance of offering different levels of difficulty occurred on the Atari. And from what I understand, a lot of these debates, once again, boiled down to get good long before the term became a part of the modern gamer's vernacular. I can't even imagine how much less accessible games were for disabled people in this era. Actually, if any of you are disabled and lived through this era, please let me know in the comments below what the gaming scene was like for you and other disabled players. I'd love to hear about your experience. There's not much recorded history that I can find of disability in gaming culture earlier than 2010-ish? Maybe we can try and remedy that. Back to the topic of difficulty in games, Bedingfield had this to say about extreme difficulty in gaming, quote, "Extreme difficulty excludes certain groups, those without the hand-eye coordination or the free time, for instance. And some players seem to revel in this exclusion for Squid Game-like competitive reasons or a fear that an easy mode might dumb down their chosen series." This feeling can manifest as the less serious flaming of casual players by experienced veterans who want their peers to rise to the challenge, or as a more serious ableism in an industry that routinely ignores players with disabilities. It's all macho gatekeeping, basically, and there's quite enough of it already. End quote. And that's the kicker right there. A lot of people are weaponizing the discussion in ways that are deeply ableist. The same ways in which we are refused access or not considered in any capacity in the physical world extends to the digital. Even the very thought of including us seems to elicit a sort of anger, as if including us is a stupid thing to do. In some cases, it's fueled by a lack of education on the subject, and for others, it's fueled by a genuine hatred of disabled people. I think a lot of people are threatened by the fact that anyone can become disabled at any time, and being reminded of our existence brings up feelings of fear, and often fear turns into anger. And of course, living in a capitalist society that values productivity above all else, those of us who can't perform in the rigid ways capitalism wants us to are seen by society and our peers as useless and lazy. But not everyone feels this way, thankfully. Bedingfield mentions that one way to combat this sort of environment is to become more cooperative instead of competitive. Encouraging an environment where players can help each other can be really powerful, like calling in a friend on co-op for a boss that you can't seem to crack yourself, or players with disabilities teaching each other how to approach gaming. The first example that comes to mind is how blind YouTuber Molly Burke did a video with blind gamer Ross Minor, where he taught her how to play games. Or one of my favorite examples from 14 years ago. Wow, yeah. It really is that long ago now, huh? Anyway, a blind gamer named Jordan Werner from Ontario, Canada, reached out online asking for help playing Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. My brain wants to say Ocarina so bad, but apparently the proper pronunciation is Ocarina, which just sounds wrong to me for some reason, but I know it's not, and anyway. A guy named Roy Williams from South Carolina in the States saw the post and befriended him. He decided him and his friends were gonna make it happen for Werner. They developed a system where they would type instructions to him and Werner's computer would read it out to him. It turns out Williams was told he was going to go blind himself when he was younger, and while it ended up not happening, it became the sort of catalyst to wanting to help Werner play the game. If life had gone a little differently, Williams would have been in the same position as Werner. With the help of his new friends, Werner completed the game. He was quoted saying, "I felt strong. I felt like the sky's the limit." And that right there is the power of inclusivity. I love that story so much. Back to Bedingfield's article for Wired. Bedingfield at one point quotes Alex Osius, a game designer who sees video games as resistance machines. Osius believes that a game with no resistance becomes a content delivery machine, and that resistance is what brings games to life. He describes difficult games as the following, quote, "It understands the value of loss and the value of suffering," he says. "It's just so human. It's supposed to feel bad, but it also feels good," unquote. Bedingfield, in regards to this, says that this dynamic is a metaphor for life itself. But what does that say about cozy games? Games like farming sims, for example, where there is little resistance and aim to help relax the player and make them feel safe, where your participation is necessary and there is some resistance, but overall it's not punishing. Or visual novels, where there is practically no mechanical difficulty to be had. Are those games not worth anything? And if mechanical difficulty is relative to the player and not a specified, easily quantifiable thing, is it right to exclude those with disabilities and fear of watering down the platform? I think the idea of games as resistance machines is fascinating, but I ultimately have to disagree. Games are a medium in which the developer can create a whole experience in any direction with any end goal. Resistance is a part of the equation, yes, but I think seeing them solely as resistance machines is somewhat reductive. It's like calling books knowledge deliverers, but a romance novel where you don't really learn anything is just as much of a book as Ulysses, whether you like it or not. If we are going to go with the idea that resistance is what makes games games, though, It's easy to see how some people could believe more accessibility waters games down or makes them worse somehow. Speaking from personal experience here, I'm currently playing Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and much to my chagrin, I chose Padawan as the difficulty level this time, which is the second easiest difficulty mode, one below normal, but not the easiest. I played Jedi Fallen Order on normal mode because I could do it at the time, but lately I've been struggling through a bad patch with my pain and fatigue. Padawan difficulty to currently flaring me feels the same as normal did when I was in a healthier state, so I still have to rely on my skill, dodging at the right times, parrying, and so on and so forth. It's just more manageable for me at this point in time. But it isn't ruining the game for me in any capacity. It feels the same. And because of this, I just can't wrap my head around the idea that more difficulty modes and accessibility features would ruin games. And even when there are multiple difficulty levels present, no one is forcing the player to choose an easier mode than what they want to play. Carlo Pasquale, also a writer for Wired, argues that more accessibility options only makes games better, and the article he wrote is titled exactly that. Go figure. Pasquale has narcolepsy, and because of this, lapses in memory. He says he's also experiencing an overall decline in functional cognitive thinking because of excessive fatigue. At least, this is what he was experiencing in 2021 when this article was published. Pasquale says this, quote, "Often, games become increasingly difficult the longer I spend playing them. The more time I focus on playing, the more likely I am to forget things like button combinations, the path to an objective, prior methods I have used in an area, items I am searching for, and whether I've returned to a spot repeatedly. Some of these issues are things many gamers take for granted and developers assume aren't issues for the player. Even if they aren't, there are still plenty of things developers can do to improve gameplay and make sure their games are more accessible to people like me." End quote. Pasquale moves on to point out that games like Minecraft Dungeons and Outriders have features that were built to help people with memory issues have a better playing experience. Minecraft Dungeons has an on-screen map where you can see where you are in the space at all times, and it updates while you explore. It lets you know where you are and shows you where you have been so you don't end up accidentally re-exploring previously accessed areas that you no longer need to go to. There's navigational assists that let you know roughly where you need to go, and if you are playing with friends and accidentally get fractured from the group, you can fast travel back to your buddies as needed. He also points out that there's an option to quick equip gear, which helps if you're struggling to remember what needs equipping and when you last updated your gear. Outriders, he continues, is what he calls a prime example of a game with remarkably useful accessibility features. The area maps are really clear. They're small, but show travel points with large markers, and an icon that, like Minecraft Dungeons, shows where you are on the map as you're going. If you track a quest, you can press a button that will give you a white line on the horizon that leads you to where you need to go. There's also the ability to pick up all loot with one button, which is still usable if you're at somewhat of a distance from where they dropped. When I was reading this article, at points I was like, damn, me too. I can definitely relate to some of this. If I'm struggling with brain fog on the day I'm playing, features like a basic mini-map that updates and has clear markers in the corner of the screen is incredibly helpful. And in my experience, most games allow you to turn it off, so if you don't want to play the game that way, no one's making you. You can turn it off, so chill out, bruh. I recently picked up Gotham Knights, which I was super psyched for as I fucking love Batman and the Bat Fam in particular. But I haven't played it much because the lack of a minimap makes it difficult for me to play. I don't always need a minimap, but in a game where you can explore all of Gotham City in its entirety, and the environment is packed with a million nooks and crannies and things to do and tons of side quests, and there's a lot of controls to remember in general, it makes it kind of stressful for me to play, especially when I tend to play a lot of games and flip between them depending on my mood. I might play Fae Farm one night, Boyfriend Dungeon the next, then Devil May Cry, then back to Gotham Knights, you get the picture. Almost any game I have no issue picking back up where I was at, but Gotham Knights is a different story. I don't know why, but I always find WB games really weird with UI too, and the controls never feel intuitive to me. For an example of the opposite, I started Jedi Survivor by Respawn Entertainment and EA a whole year and a half after I played the first installment, Jedi Fallen Order, and yet somehow the controls were incredibly easy to pick up again. And every time I turn it on, it's easy for me to jump back in. I don't struggle at all with remembering how to wall jump, how to climb, how to drop from a surface instead of jump off of it, how to use the force, what each attack button is, how to dodge. It commits itself easily to memory. Yet, whenever I turn on Gotham Knights, I get overwhelmed every single time trying to remember everything. Accessing the different menus is chaotic and unintuitive for me too. It feels off somehow. I think for this reason, clear UI and thoughtful button mapping can be seen as an accessibility feature in and of itself. Back to Pasquale's article, he suggests that developers can help players with memory problems in the following ways. If you've gone in circles a ton of times, a message could pop up asking if you need help on where to go. If you've been running around an area looking for items, maybe pop up some little markers to show the player where they're at. You could even use sound to do this for blind or visually impaired players. According to Pasquale, some games actually do this. I've personally never encountered this, but I think this is really cool. Actually, now that I think about it, I think I have played games where the loot makes a sparkly sound. I can't remember which title this is. If you guys know what I'm half remembering, please let me know in the comment below. It's driving me nuts now trying to figure it out. Help your boy out. You could also remind the player of what the controls are if they're trying to figure out how to cross a gap in the landscape and seem to not be using the jump button. You could ask the player if they'd like to be reminded of the right button to press. I personally don't know if this one is fully necessary, just because most games have a controls section in the menu that you can access. I find when I'm playing games like Gotham Knights, I pull up the controls menu a lot more often than I'd like to, if I'm honest. But I'm glad it's a fairly common feature in games. It makes a big difference. If you're making a game and you don't have a controls section in the menu, please add one. It's helpful for everyone, not just people with disabilities. Jedi Survivor will show little reminders of the controls throughout the environment, and it's pretty unobtrusive. I've yet to hear anyone complain about it. It also has a great feature where if you're stuck in one area for too long, a little thing will pop up on your screen asking if you'd like a hint, and it gives you the option to accept or refuse. And the hint is truly a hint. It won't tell you what to do exactly, but it'll jog your memory and point you in the right direction. I'm a fan of this approach. And once again, Pasquale stressed the same point I mentioned myself earlier. Accessibility features don't necessarily make the game easier. It just gives the ability for people who are not able-bodied to have fun while playing games too. And for the developers and players that say not every game is meant for everyone, Pasquale has this to say, quote, "Developers should ask themselves, if they incorporate accessibility, will it truly affect the underlying mechanics of the game? Inclusivity and accessibility shouldn't automatically be associated with the notion that it devalues the quality and overall enjoyment of a game," end quote. I couldn't agree with that more. And if I can add my 2 cents, my 2 pennies, if you will. Fuck it, I'm gonna give you a whole ass $1. I kind of think people assume accessibility features dumb down a game, cause they think disabled people are dumb. I know, hot take. Or is it? Cause seriously, the overwhelming societal attitudes towards us are still infantilization, seeing us as lesser, seeing us as, well, dumb. We're seen as wholly incapable of everything, despite our disabilities usually only affecting us in specific areas. And when it does affect us in every area, it's typically due to a lack of access and proper infrastructure. And we're mocked for it. The comments sections under disabled YouTubers are usually an ableist hellscape. Many of us have had people use baby voices to speak to us regardless of our age set, and people still use the R slur as an insult towards people they think are stupid or unworthy of listening to. And just recently in the UK, a grown woman was denied access to a bar because they said she needed parental supervision to enter. The woman was going to meet with friends and they refused her access and treated her like a child who couldn't look after herself. And to make matters worse, they made a statement on their Facebook page standing by their decision to refuse her access, saying, "We're a pub, not a creche." Creche is another term for a children's nursery for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term. So yeah, they doubled down on that shit. They apparently deleted the Facebook post, but the damage is already done. This idea that giving us accessibility features to games dumbs them down or damages the gameplay experience is directly tied to the fact that people see us as dumb and damaged. That's what I think anyway. Back to Pasquale's article for the last time. He argues that manufacturers of console hardware and game retailers also have a considerable role to play. If we buy a game or hardware that is completely unplayable for us, we should have the ability to return it. Good refund policies are also crucial. He states that we should have at least 2 weeks to return it, as that's usually enough time to really see if a game or product can work for you. A lot of stores won't allow returns on opened games due to DMCA issues apparently, which I actually had no idea about. I mostly own digital copies these days, and I don't return games very often. And finally, publishers and developers should really listen to feedback from people with chronic and invisible illnesses. People like me or Pasquale, you might not know we're ill at first glance, and a lot of accessibility features are aimed at people with visible disabilities. But we deserve accessibility too. Disabilities and chronic illnesses are dynamic and diverse. We don't all need the same things. He ends his article with a quote from Microsoft Executive Vice President and Head of Xbox, Phil Spencer. "When everybody plays, we all win. Hey, you, remember when I said to put a pin in something earlier? We're back, baby!" Earlier I said that making games accessible to many different players is not an easy task to undertake. So far we've talked quite a bit about the need for more difficulty modes, and we've also talked about how disabled players have been asking for more accessibility features outside of just an easy mode. Yet somehow the entire discussion is often boiled down to just difficulty modes by detractors and allies alike. I think this goes to show how much mechanical difficulty is baked into gaming culture and how it truly is the most defining feature in games. In regards to easy modes, writer Grant Stoner on IGN said, quote, "A generalized easy mode is not something the industry can, or frankly should, adopt." Unquote. While an easy mode is often greatly appreciated, it is easier said than done. What constitutes an easy mode exactly? There is no industry standard or formula for this. Writer Swapna Krishna, for example, states that the term easy mode is kind of a misnomer, because it doesn't actually remove all the obstacles and make it easy for the player to breeze through the game. Easy modes are actually just applying tweaks that allow the player to tackle the game in a way that works for them. There are still plenty of challenges present for the player to overcome. Krishna, an advocate for more accessibility in games, states that the games who do it right are the games that allow you to change and alter specific aspects in the settings. In her opinion, the title Control by Remedy Entertainment did it right. Originally criticized for being inaccessible, they added what they called an assist mode, which allows the player to customize pretty much everything about their gameplay experience. But since the game has an element of interpretive difficulty with the puzzles and other parts of the game, there is still a challenge present. I think this is a great point. Could this be a possible solution for games going forward? If the developer is aware of the different types of difficulty present in the medium, they could effectively let the player choose to amp up or play down mechanical difficulty in favor of interpretive, or vice versa. I don't think I like the idea, however, of allowing the player to tweak effective difficulty, as I think being able to choose the level of emotional intensity would just be a negative thing. This isn't me saying I don't believe in giving the consumer content warnings or phobia warnings. Far from it. But what I do mean is that if you remove the effective difficulty of Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, it effectively renders the game useless in my opinion. What would be the point in playing it? Let's end our coverage of Krishna's article with the following, quote, "Adding an easy mode to a game isn't just an automatic switch. It takes time time, effort, and work to do effectively. I'd much rather have it applied well with settings that make sense for the gameplay and story. That's crucial because not every game should have the same kind of easy mode. Hades, a popular Nintendo Switch game that's also known for being tough, levels down the difficulty as you play if you're dying a lot. Others let you dial down the enemy damage or increase your longevity. The crucial thing is that each game has an easy mode that suits it, while also ensuring that people who pre-ordered and booted up the game on day one can experience it as its creators intended. End quote. Ultimately, we have to be mindful of how we go about making games more accessible. I think difficulty fetishists who are against accessibility in games are seeing it in a really oversimplified fashion. Kind of like that analogy Krishna used about it not being as simple as an automatic switch. I think a lot of people really do reduce it down to that. But people aren't asking for a button that deconstructs the game, for all obstacles to be removed so we can watch it like a movie with no physical input. Without our participation, without any actual gameplay, it would cease to be a game. And if someone wanted to experience a story without gameplay, whether inputted by themselves or their favorite streamer, they are free to choose any other medium like books or television shows. We're not asking for the wholesale destruction of the medium, we just want the ability to enjoy games too, alongside our peers. It is absolutely possible to balance a game well for its respective difficulty modes and myriad accessibility features. We've seen it done successfully in this current era time and time again, and it isn't watering down the medium or hurting anyone. Unless that isn't their worry and they're more worried about not having someone beneath their boot in their little digital pissing contest. If that's the case, then I don't know what to say to you. I'm gonna wrap this up with some recommendations for some really cool platforms that are invaluable resources for disabled players. I'd recommend checking these out regardless of if you're disabled or not though, cause knowledge is power. And you'll be able to direct disabled gamers in need of these platforms or even donate funds to help further inclusion in the industry. All of the following websites will be linked in the description box with all of my sources as per usual, and I will display each site's links on screen at the end of each feature. Let's start with Can I Play That, a website that, well, tells you if you can play that. Jokes aside, Can I Play That is an incredible resource that offers accessibility reviews of games, commentary, news, and accessibility reference guides. Not to mention, they also provide accessibility guidelines, run workshops on diversity, equity, and inclusion in games, and offer accessible community management. They proudly declare on their site that their content is by disabled gamers for disabled gamers. Can I Play That was founded in 2018 by Susan Banks and Courtney Craven, and has been going strong ever since. Oh, and remember I mentioned Grant Stoner, who wrote one of the articles I was citing earlier? He's part of the Can I Play That team and was part of the Game Awards voting committee in 2020. You can find that at caniplaythat.com. Next up, we have Game Accessibility Nexus, which kind of splintered off of Can I Play That. Founder Antonio I. Martinez left Can I Play That to start his own project, to help not only disabled gamers, but to provide direct feedback to developers. Game Accessibility Nexus is a great resource for those who need accessibility features and for developers who are planning for accessibility in their games. They do game reviews, articles on assistive software and hardware, provide commentary, interviews, and recommend games with high levels of accessibility. They have a fully disabled and chronically ill staff who provide all content to the website as volunteer work. They say their core values are centered around inclusion, diversity, and equality. The website is really well organized, and it's very easy to find what you're looking for fast. You can find them at GameAccessibilityNexus.com. And finally, we have Able Gamers, a platform with a mission to create meaningful social experiences for people with disabilities using video games as the chosen medium. The project started when founder Mark Bartlett, a service-disabled USAF veteran, saw co-founder Stephanie Walker struggling to play due to the progression of her multiple sclerosis. They couldn't play together anymore, which prompted the two of them to found the organization with hopes of empowering disabled players. And, of course, fostering a community. According to their official site, disabled people are 51% more likely to be socially isolated than their able-bodied counterparts. I don't know why reading this statistic hit me so hard. I, of all people, should know that's the case, considering how little I leave my place and sometimes even my room. In their words, Able Gamers believes in using the power of play and inclusion to connect players, build communities, and combat social isolation. They offer peer counseling for disabled players and conduct engineering research for assistive technologies to increase quality of play. Not only is that incredible in and of itself, they also offer so much more than what I've just mentioned. I highly recommend checking them out. You can find them over on ablegamers.org. Organizations and projects like the ones just mentioned are crucial to the advancement of accessibility in games. And of course, combating difficulty fetishism. We need developers to not just listen to our requests, we need to convince them that the extra work is necessary and appreciated. And while I think disabled people shouldn't have to keep explaining why we deserve to be included all the time, it's unfortunately what we gotta do. Especially in a realm where practically no one considers us or even cares. I can tell you that upon becoming disabled myself, I realized how truly invisible we are to the average person. Despite the fact that the World Health Organization estimates that we are literally the largest minority group in the world. Let that sink in. There are 1 billion of us, possibly more. Even the most progressive people will suddenly be completely mind-blown when you point out that their activism addresses everyone except the chronically ill and disabled population. Which is why we need to boldly take up space and use our voices unapologetically. And for the allies, this is why we need your voices. People listen to you more than they listen to us. And if you can use that power to remind others of our existence and direct them to sources that can further open minds and create positive change, man, that would be a sight to see. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Gold star for you, Junpei. If you understand that reference, you're a cool bean. And if you didn't, well, you're still pretty cool for watching this video in the first place and making it to the part where I ramble. I hope this was enjoyable, or maybe even a little enlightening. If you learned something, enjoyed today's discussion, or just want to stick around for more nerd feel free to like and subscribe. But no pressure, we believe in free choice around here. I do videos about asexuality, queerness, disability, and chronic illness through the lens of fiction and pop culture, so if that's your jam, I'd love for you to stick around. I also offer sensitivity reading and consultancy for those topics over on Ko-fi, so if you'd like my input on a project you're working on, give me a shout. And of course, if you want to tip me, you can do that over there too. And don't forget, all my sources are linked in the description box. Alright fam, I'm running out of shit to say. Take care everyone, stay rad, see you in the next one.